Glad to see you again at Artistic Intelligence. I'm your host, Neil Sahota. Our guest today transforms the mundane, like the sounds of footsteps, into something magical, like the ringing of bells, or even moving a robotic arm. In fact, he's even exploring how to take data and bring historical figures back to life digitally to converse on contemporary issues. Let's take a peek at his work before we dive into the world of sound art.
Frère Jacques, dormez-vous, dormez-vous, sonnez les matines, ding dang dong, ding dang dong. Autant qu'elle réfléchisse.
Voilà, nous ont donné la réplique.
C'est l'effet papillon, non?
Un peu, ouais. Non, mais c'est vrai que ça me fait penser. Ça y fait un peu penser.
This is Artistic Intelligence, where we explore the intersection of art, sustainability, and technology. This show is brought to you in partnership with the United Nations ITU AI for Good, Changing the Story podcast, and State. Now let's join your co-hosts, Neil Sahota and Michael Ashley.
Welcome to another episode of Artistic Intelligence. We have a phenomenal guest today. Budhaditya Chattopadhyay is an Indian-born media artist, research, and writer. He produces works for large-scale installation and live performance addressing contemporary issues of climate crisis, human intervention in the environment and ecology, urbanity, migration, race, and decolonization. He's received numerous fellowships, residencies, and international awards. He holds a PhD in artistic research and an MA in new media. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Great to have you here with us today. So could you tell us the story of you and tell us the story of your art?
It's a long story, but to cut it short, I'm working with sound for the last 12 years. Sound as a primary medium, but I also work with visuals, which are accompaniment to the sound experience. I also work with text. I write a lot. And I was trained, to give a little bit of background, I was trained in sound in the National Film School of India, and then moved to Europe to study new media. And then I moved on to study for my PhD in Copenhagen University and then Leiden University, where I defended my PhD in artistic research and sound studies in 2017. And then I completed a postdoctoral position at the American University of Beirut last year.
Wow, that's fantastic. I know that we were chatting about your work earlier, and you got a couple of very fascinating projects. We'd love to hear more about your work and what's on the horizon here.
Yeah, I just started to work with AI and machine learning from a personal interest. If I give you a little background, it will be perhaps a bit clearer that
Sure.
in 2015 and 16, I was at an artist in residence program at the Kunst University Graz. It's a very well-known university. They have a center called IEM, Institute of Electronic Music and Acoustics. And a number of super collider PD maestros are sitting there as a researcher associated with the institution. So I was there, so I was kind of initiated to work with generative systems. So 2015 to 16, and then 17, 18, I developed a work called Exile and Other Syndromes, which was a generative visual and sound, multi-channel sound installation. From that project, I somehow got interested to work with generative systems, and then as a logical conclusion to AI and machine learning. And that is the beginning, 15, 16, 17. That is the time I was initiated into this realm.
That's wonderful. So when you say this realm, can you describe for our listeners who aren't aware of your work, what it is that you're involved in?
I'm involved with sound sculptures, primarily sound installations and sound performances, which are site responsive and often self-regulating. So the self-regulating aspect of the works are something I would like to underscore, because those are the aspects which are enriched by artificial intelligence, because I often work with ML machine learning codes, which are sensate listeners, and they can take decisions. So I create some sort of auditory situations which are fertile and evolving, which can regulate themselves. This is a primary aspect of my work with AI. That's my what is called real milieu.
That's fascinating. You said sound sculpture, so I've never heard that term before. Can you describe what that means?
Sound sculptures are sound objects, but dispersed in space, in a particular, let's say, a museum space or a gallery space, occupying a certain amount of space in that gallery venue location. The sound, it's difficult to contain sound within a frame. So it is always an expanded object. So as an expanded object, a sound sculpture can occupy the gallery space and outside of the gallery space, because sound always spills over. So a sound sculpture for me is something which is occupying a space, but often going above, beyond the space container. So in visually speaking, that can be the video recordings that I'll send you, that will make you more maybe aware how sound sculptures can be defined in different ways. But sound objects, sound producing objects, they are installed in a space, and that space changes, transforms through this intervention, sonic intervention.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Maybe you could share like one of your projects. Like I remember you were talking about one of your sound sculptures, and I remember right, it translates to resonance. Maybe you can share with the audience a little bit more about that piece.
Right. How to share a video here? I don't know that how to do that.
Well,
but
maybe you could just describe it, right? Because I remember you were talking about you're using the sensors and the number of bells that you had, and
yes, of course. Yeah, so to begin with, before I go to the Dhani project, I'll just introduce another project which I worked in 2019 called Machine Poetry. And Machine Poetry was installed in Helsinki. It was a generative installation with sounds installed in a gallery called Akusmata in Helsinki. And those sounds were generating textual imageries, live visuals, generative visuals, which are drawing sounds from the environment itself. So when the ambient sound environment was loud enough, then the text generation was much more intense. And when there is a ambient sound was lower in parameters such as certain texture, volume, and mass, then the text generation was a bit lower. So based on different parameters, set parameters, generative visuals were installed in the exhibition. So that is the time I was initiated into working with generative system and machine learning. And then I started working with Dhani project, which is part of my postdoc, Connecting Resonances. Connecting Resonances is a project that joins the global south and global north, modernity, Western modernity and tradition and ritualistic aspect of sound. Because I argue that sound recording as a technology, it was a Western imperial intervention into the sound culture that global south had, like India, for one of the examples, where there is a atemporal and perspectiveless experience of sound. So I take that ritualistic element of sound, such as temple bells, and put it into an automated environment and finding out how these two worlds can coalesce. Then these two worlds can have a dialogue, which is Western modernity and its technological realm and the ritualistic aspect of sound. So in Dhani installation, which I developed with Google Arts and Culture, they have an AMI program, Artist and Machine Learning. I developed a system where those bells can be actuated using robotic arms, and those robotic arms can be activated by an ML code. And that ML code is also a sensor listener to the situation, wherein anybody who is visiting, the exhibition visitors, they can activate the bells. Their footsteps, their presence, their bodily sounds, their like this tapping, everything will have an effect on the system. And the system will regulate itself, taking the sound as those sounds, incidental sounds made during the exhibition, and also individual activation of the bell. For example, a child can come and touch one bell, and maybe in two hands, two bells. So bells are activated. So sounds are generated through this activation. So the system will regulate itself by moving the robotic arms. So ritual sounds such as temple bells, which are used only in temples in let's say remote areas in India for worshipping purposes, they are completely transformed into a post-human, post-technological realm within which they are re-listened, redefined, and have a dialogue with the artificial intelligence and machine learning induced world, which is automation.
That's so cool.
So I was thinking the same thing. It reminds me in some ways of a Hegelian dialectic where you have the old and the new, and then you have something that's a combination. So of the two, you have an emergent phenomenon. So what is it that you wish to evoke by having this? You know, you're talking about the ritualistic interpretations of the music, things that have been, I would assume, generationally with the South, and then this new technology, and now something wonderful is being birthed that's never occurred before. What is it that you wish to share with the world? What is it that you're trying to say through this?
A few things. One is the idea of inter-subjectivity. intersubjectivity, like nature and culture. Through the development of Western modernity, nature and culture are often kept separate. Like nature, landscape painting is outside of the human realm. So anthropogenic realm is something insular, and nature is outside of it. And through this division, nature has been often exploited, because this is an entry point to understand that nature is something like an object, like a landscape painting, that human has the capacity to exploit and retrieve resources from. So this idea is extremely, embedded in the Western modernity, idea of Western modernity, the technological revolution and the colonization of the nature. But I'm trying to develop a different kind of thought process, which is reciprocity and intersubjectivity. My main purpose in this project and many other projects to develop the dialogue between humans and machines, not only humans and machines, but also nature and culture, and also global South and the global North, because often it's understood, or from a Western perspective, global South is thought as something primitive and indigenous and oral culture, and the visual culture is far more powerful, the Western culture itself. So many scholars have argued in this way. So I'm trying to kind of challenge and intervene as an artist to develop an idea of reciprocity between two worlds, between two realms, and a dialogue. And this dialogue is happening between, in case of Dhwani project, between ritualistic sounds and associated thoughts related to religion, history, tradition, and AI and machine learning, which is kind of technological modernity's kind of climactic moment. But what brings them together is the idea of generativeness. Generativeness is chance factor is there, because humans are leaving the control out of their hand. There is a kind of alien agency, like Christopher Salter writes about alien agency. So this is the alien agency that happens within AI and machine learning. Humans don't have much control over what happens in a generative system, right? Machine is given an agency, and that is alien, that is contingent. We don't know. There is a kind of mysticism, and this mysticism, this alien agency, is very related to the indigenous idea of global South. If you go to the traditional tribal areas, they practice generative sounds and music, and their cultural practices are based on generative systems. So I think that there is a kind of merging of these two worlds in AI realm, and that is what I would like to explore.
So just one quick follow-up, Neil, before that, just to understand correctly. I think what you're saying is there's a kind of mysticism inherent in these indigenous cultures, something that's mysterious that we cannot know. And
yes, contingent and chance, based on chance factor, and contingent to situations and contexts.
Sure. And then there's almost a black box aspect to AI where we put it in, but we cannot know what's going to occur. Are you saying that these kind of dovetail with each other? Is that what you're...
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
It's my perspective. I think there not much has been written about, and not much has been even researched in this line of thinking. But I kind of, I'm trying to hinting at, these two worlds are kind of close somehow, because of this chance factor, the factor of contingency.
Right. That's fascinating.
I think it's actually phenomenal, because there's a whole area in AI called generative design now, where rather than, do all these different things, you just give the machine parameters. Like if you wanted to build a car or a plane, you tell it things like, well, like a plane needs enough thrust and lift, these other things. And then you say, I need a plane like with 200 people, and it's going to be this fuel efficient, and it's going to range. And the machine will figure out millions upon millions of possibilities, and they kind of reslot based on things. But one of the things that we've seen is that the AI will actually start manufacturing like materials we've never put together before. right? And trying to figure out some of these things. And it's unlocking these different opportunities. And I think that's been kind of a fascinating thing. It's, human engineers still have the final say, and they're looking at, the 5 to 12 best options put forward. But the fact that we have machines essentially even crafting materials we've never seen before has been fascinating.
Yeah,
that sounds very much in the resonance you're talking about.
Unpredictability.
Yeah.
And indeterminate. This indeterminacy is something should be underscored. This indeterminacy, which is termed as alien agency. Alien because we don't know yet.
How did you wind up on this path? I mean, how did you see the synchronicity between, the art and AI and, the dialogue for global North, global South, and, nature and culture? I mean, what was kind of your epiphany or aha moment? That, wow,
The idea of global South and global North and the idea of confluence between them was developing inside me when I moved to Europe. Slowly, I was getting exposed to the perspectives that are emergent and which are already existing in the kind of European gaze on me as a person coming from global South.
Mm-hmm.
And I was kind of self-determining my position. I was trying to understand what is my identity and what is the representation that I pose to the world, to my very immediately my peers. And through this examination, I came into the idea of the global North and global South and the historical constituents of the construction of an identity, Indian and from the third world, from the global South. This kind of identifications were bothering me. So I was trying to understand that, am I only a person from the global South, or I'm a product of globalization? So if I take globalization as a fundamental point of entry into this discourse, then I need to find out the way in which historically global North and global South was having a dialogue, having a conversation within each other. And technologically, I was thinking, the technological aspect of this conversation was something I was looking at primarily.
Wow.
Recording technology is one example.
Well, I think that the search for identity is a big part of any effective art, and that makes absolute sense why you would feel that way and why you would turn to this form of expression to help you deal with these issues. And I think anyone can put themselves in your shoes when you say it that way. How has it been received? Both people from the global South and the global North. What has been the response to the art that you're creating?
So far, the few exhibitions I was having, the machine learning induced Dhwani project, and the next project I'm working on, PlanchetBot. They're generating a kind of interest in the global scale, like different festivals. Dhwani has been invited to have an exhibition next year, 2 exhibitions already. So response is very, very interesting for me. And I'm also working on I already discussed last time we talked about the PlanchetBot project. Next, through 3 to 5 years, I'll be working on the project. It is using data sets of historical figures, because I always work with data sets, archival materials. My master's thesis was about how to reappropriate archival sound recordings into new work of sound installation and sound art and sound sculptures. And so data sets are something I'm very much interested in, and my research is focused on historical data sets and how they can be used into different forms of new media artworks. So in PlanchetBot, I'm working with data sets of historical figures, including their audio recordings, their own writings on them, video recordings of them, whether they are available, and then using those data sets to create an aura of their persona. And that can be manifested in different forms, such as chatbot, also automated voice. And I also plan to develop, or which at this moment I'm not equipped to do that, but in collaboration with a few other scientists and AI specialists that I know, I'd like to develop finally a holographic image of the historical figures. And those historical figures may include Gandhi. I'm at this point I'm working with Gandhi, developing a data set of Gandhi writings, audio and video. Then Nelson Mandela, Abraham Lincoln, Winston Churchill, because these figures are important to go back or brought back to the contemporary realm, contemporary world, because of the crisis that we have. Mm-hmm. And perhaps their intervention could be useful.
Yeah. I mean, going back to what we were talking earlier about taking the old and marrying it with the new.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely fascinating, really cool that you are going back to individuals like Gandhi. How can we use their messages, what they had to say? How can it be applied today in ways that perhaps he didn't initially intend for, but really speak to the times that we're going into right now? How can it be even more relevant to today?
Perhaps we can ask them, because I'm thinking about staging performances, which is a staged conversation between one historical figure and me and the public. It's open for public, so anybody can ask questions. And those questions may range from contemporary crises to the controversies around the figures themselves, such as recently in South Africa, Gandhi's figure was vandalized, a statue, bust was vandalized, because it was thought that in his early period, like in his younger age, his approach was a bit racist. So one may ask Gandhi, why are you seen as someone having a kind of racial inclination or racial prejudice? Mm-hmm. How do you, when you grow up as a mature person, how do you see yourself distancing from your earlier comments and positions? So this kind of not only create a dialogue between old and new, but also revisit them in the contemporary context, mm-hmm. to rediscover them in the contemporary context. Mm-hmm. And one may also ask questions like, how do you think about the migration crisis? So given that Gandhi himself was an immigrant in South Africa, mm-hmm. maybe he will enlighten the problems that we have today. Mm-hmm. Like Mandela may have something extremely important to say, given the data sets of his own writing and given the contemporary context as also another data set. May have something to say about race and Black Lives Matter, mm-hmm. for example.
Yeah. I could see that with like Mandela, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's Black Lives Matter and racial justice is going on, it's a hot topic today. It's something he lived through. But I were talking to Abraham Lincoln about social media, right?
Yes.
How would Abraham Lincoln be able to do that, right?
Yeah, of course.
So does that mean that there's certain topics that maybe they couldn't really talk to? Like if they don't have a background, there's not enough data out there, you couldn't invoke that kind of conversation.
Yes, of course. We cannot ask him about social media, but we can ask about the global village idea or ideas about early globalization, migration. Migration was not just contemporary idea, but it was also happening during his lifetime. Mm-hmm. Slavery.
There are common problems that perpetuate, unfortunately, throughout history. Like you look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, things like hunger and poverty and education have just been permeating. Yeah, that's amazing. I can't wait to try that. Okay, you're gonna tell me when it's ready?
Yeah, it will take a couple of years to develop everything because I'm also working on a book, so I cannot completely invest in this project, but it's like on the back of my mind, and also when I get time, I work on it. I'm collaborating with few other artists,
Cool.
AI specialists, people with Google.
You know, when you talk about these things here, Neil and I, Neil much more than me, have had the privilege to even hear about things like what you're talking about. I think to the average person in the United States, this feels like something out of Neuromancer. It feels very science fiction-esque, and they're like, "Whoa, this is really possible." So, well, you know, and I wonder in your own personal circle, I mean, maybe your acquaintances and colleagues and friends are up on this, but I can tell you that if I were to mention this at a party amongst my peers, they would just be like blown away that this is possible.
No, it's possible. I've already developed a chatbot with Gandhi. So
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
By the way, just what you just said there, it's like just saying that someone would be like, wait, what? What has been the response amongst people, not maybe so much the people that are in this realm with you, but just a little bit outside of it, because it seems so incredible. It almost feels like magic, really. What is the response that you're getting when you tell people about this amazing work you're doing?
I don't know if it's amazing, but this project has already been, because I started this project this year. It's very new. I'm just into it. And I proposed this project for because I want to develop Karl Marx as one of the chatbots. So I wanted to go to Russia and do archival research to find materials about him. So I applied for at ITMO in St. Petersburg, and they accepted this proposal, and they invited me to go there when the pandemic situation gets better. So so response is that I'm breaking through the funding process slowly. So this is the first application I did this year for this project, and I got in. So I think in future I'll also get other supports, because you need institutional support. You're gonna do this always alone, you know. So institutional context and support will give a lot of energy into it. And there is a kind of motivation to make a presentation at the end of a residency, funded residency. So I'm going to St. Petersburg to do the research on Karl Marx, and we'll develop a prototype for Karl Marx chatbox, and if possible, and also an automated voice of Karl Marx.
Wow, that'd be fascinating. That'd be awesome. I mean, I can tell you that you're taking this to a whole new level. I know we talked before that the interview that the Shoah Foundation has their institute that does with genocide, and they're talking about that the Holocaust victims have started passing away. And so about 5-6 years ago, they put together a list of like 2,000 questions, created a special dome with all these cameras around them, and basically spent weeks asking each of them all these questions. They turned them into holograms or video things, and they're using AI so that you can have a conversation with them. You ask a question and the AI will interpret that and pull up the right video clip to play. But you're taking this to a whole new level with your planchette.
Yeah. I'm trying to develop a kind of uncanny valley where the fascinating similarity of voice, because I'm not using visual material very much. I'm mainly focusing on the voice aspect. Also, chatbot box is the initial entry into this project, but automated voice. Visual may come later when I more advanced with the project in the form of hologram, but in voice, this uncanny similarity, this uncanny valley idea that you can think this is Gandhi, but this may not be Gandhi. So this very indeterminate possibility around a figure like a ghostly remnants of Gandhi. So this is an exciting and fascinating, and I think in some way sensationalizing the figure in the contemporary context, and that can be also a bit subversive, you know. So this subversive aspect is also there.
Actually, could you explore that for a moment? What do you mean by that, the subversive aspect?
Subversive aspect as such, in the form like, if I think of developing a bot for Hitler, and then the kind of questions that may emerge and the response, they can get somehow messy, you know.
Yeah, my mind hadn't gone there, but you're absolutely right. It hadn't hit me that could definitely be something that you could employ this with.
I mean, given that, and we know that technology is a tool that can be used for good or for bad. I mean, what advice would you give an artist today that's trying to explore these fields? I mean, what would you suggest to them?
Particularly if I focus on AI and machine learning, I think there is a general perception, particularly in conservative societies like India and many parts of global South, they have a kind of fear. And also in Europe, I can perceive that fear about AI systems, AI-induced systems. Not only the fear of being jobs to be dissolved and taken by AI, but also about this indeterminacy, which cannot be understood from a very human anthropogenic position. And I think artists like me, who are working with new media and technology, art, science, technology, their role could be crucial to create this intersubjectivity between humans and machines. There is a fantastic project last year I saw in Sao Paulo, the conversation between a human and a robot. And it's a project only about, it's a video work where a human and a robot is trying to communicate. And the absurdity of this communication, which is falling apart, which is failing. But still, the gestures that are generated in this conversation, something which I would like to explore further. How can the idea of post-humanism emerge through keeping a base on the conversational aspect between humans and machines, the reciprocity between humans and machines? This is something I wanted to develop in Dhwani, and I have achieved a little bit of that in Dhwani, because the system is actually responding to human presence. Like if you touch a little plant, the plant is, there are plants which responds to human advances, which goes squeezed itself. So I'm thinking, or even in a garden, if you touch a little plant and the entire network of plants are moving. So I'm thinking about the network aspect of this maze between humans and machines. Because what happens to humans can affect the machines, and what happens to machines can affect the humans. So they are belonging to the same network. And it also coming from the Gaia theory. James Lovelock, you may know James Lovelock, his work on the Gaia theory. And he's proposing that every object in this world are self-regulating. Art is a self-regulating system.
Yes.
So if we think in this way, then there is no nature, there is no culture. We are part of the entire self-regulating system. And as entities, if we think ourselves as separate entities, then we need to also think how those separate entities can be part of a network and can have conversation between each other.
Yeah, that's I hadn't thought about that. That's very interesting. So, but when I hear you talking about, replicating Gandhi or Lincoln, it seems to me this is unprecedented in the history of our planet, where it could be 100 years from now, assuming the humans are still around, and they could be experiencing and interacting with these individuals. What might that look like for future generations to interact with the work that you're creating now?
It's nothing new. There are communities, like tribal communities, indigenous communities. I have worked with them. I have lived there in the tribal places in India. And I have experienced that knowledge is derived from what is called the Gram Panchayat, like the head of the village.
Mm.
It's not political head, but a wise person, a very old with beard.
Sure.
So whenever there is a crisis happening, everybody is going to him for knowledge, kind of getting wisdom, getting suggestions. So I'm thinking Gandhi, Mandela, Churchill, and figures like them. They are like grand old men of our societies. So their presence, perhaps bodily, materially, they are not present, but the kind of knowledge base they have created. We can go back now and then to this knowledge base for finding different perspectives to the crises, the problems that we have today.
So we're essentially creating a AI-powered set of village elders.
Yes, exactly. Village elders. They are village elders.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Budhaditya, this has been absolutely fascinating. If people want to stay in touch with you, follow your work, learn more about what's going on, what's the best way for them to stay in touch with you?
I don't have a mailing list, but my website is budhaditya.org, and I put everything up there, documentation, news, and upcoming events. So anybody can visit the website from anywhere in the world. And I'm available always for a chat, a nice conversation, where I'm online or offline or in person or remotely, or even in a planchette setting.
Fantastic.
Awesome. We'll make sure that puts the show notes so everyone will have access to that. And Budhaditya, thank you so much for being a guest. This has been a fantastic conversation.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Hey, if you like today's show, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment.
If you've been enjoying the Changing the Story podcast series, please subscribe and share it with your friends.
Thank you.